Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off this forecast video, I'm going to focus a lot on this near-term heat wave and the severe weather I expect to kind of run around the ring or the perimeter of it. I want to talk about the duration of the heat wave. I want to talk about its impacts, I think, mainly with very, very hot overnight lows and what that could be doing to the crop. And then we're going to stretch it out. We want to know how long it's going to last. We want to understand maybe what the upcoming pattern is doing and how long it's going to take to transition. So I'm going to get to all of that. Plus, I want to talk to you a bit more about La Nina at the end of this and give you one more kind of seasonal piece to the forecast with the new IRI multi-model probability forecast that was released. All right, so that's all ahead of us. This is what's going on right now. This was just early this morning, looking at lightning strikes across the country. And it was one of those weekends where we saw some pretty intense convection. As you kind of look yesterday, just as the sun was setting, a couple of neat features to keep an eye on here. There's still more Canadian wildfire smoke that's moving throughout the Great Lakes region. There was an interesting bit of a circulation just off kind of our southeast coast, really more south of Bermuda and north and east of the Bahamas here. But just take a look at this. We're going to talk more about the tropics and when I expect them to kind of get going again. And then just the deep convection. There has been no trouble in the atmosphere with being capable this summer of producing massive storms like this. And they have come through with incredibly heavy rainfall, and they've also come through with lots and lots of hail. Now, one thing to just take note of here in the west, while California has been very, very dry, the heat waves in California have kind of come and gone. We're going to see a major swing in temperatures out west again, but there are some wildfires to continue to pay attention to. And this cloud cover cooling things off over the weekend, bringing some rain into the northwest was, we know that that's one of our driest spots in the country compared to historical averages since spring. So we'll keep a close eye on that as well. Again, over the weekend, I kept working on some stuff. This is kind of my latest iteration. It's not live on the web yet, but I'm hoping this is going to be much more useful. I'll break it down into several regions across the country. But again, I got this hover option on my maps now, and you just be able to kind of see where, but the precipitation was. I think it's a very useful tool. I'm doing this for hail and lots of other things as well. But just want to point out there is a corridor in through here that we're going to have to continue to watch carefully as we go forward in this forecast for the potential for very, very heavy rainfall. While I'm quite concerned about the development of drought, the flash drought in this area. Now, we've got some other pockets of drought that could get filled in, but the overall setup of this pattern is to kind of favor these two areas that I've highlighted with sizable precipitation extremes. All right, so we'll get this stuff live for you very soon. I just need to finish the code and make sure that it works fine and get it out there on the web for all of you. I mentioned the hail. Just look over the last 7 days at where the kind of corridor for our stronger storms has been. Now, this was through midnight today, and what it shows, again, is just parts of the Central Plains, getting over to the Corn Belt. Numerous storms have put down hail that's done a lot of damage to the crop. I've seen just many pictures, both on Twitter and just that have been sent to me of just hail damage to the crop that's going in the midsection of the country. We're still on pace in 2025 to being one of the busiest years since we've been keeping records with respect to severe weather. I believe we're currently ranking second in tornadoes and second in wind damage. Hail's a bit tricky because of the changes in standards on the reporting size, bumping up from 3/4 of an inch to an inch several years ago. But as we think this through, this is the bigger idea. Where have we been over the last 2 weeks? Overall, my eye is just drawn to this corridor in through here. And that would be that region through which we've had such just exceptionally heavy rainfall coming through. Now, that's not to take away from other spots like the flooding in Kansas or what we saw in this part of Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago. This does not include the massive flooding event on July the 4th because 2 weeks ago was not far back enough in the history here, but you've seen since the rain that's fallen in this part of Texas. So this is an area that's going over very dry. And there are holes. And sometimes when I made this color bar, it sometimes masks what I want to be able to see, which is where the holes are. I'm just thinking about pockets like here or in parts of Nebraska, South Dakota. There are these areas that have been missed. We must pay close attention to those. So we try to look at it a lot of different ways. This is just since the beginning of the new month here of July. what our precipitation ranks by climate district look like. And it's again to illustrate the importance of some of the rainfall that made it into the Northwest this past weekend. It was sporadic. It wasn't wide in coverage, but there was some that got in there given how dry it's been. We've had flooding in the mid-Atlantic. We've had very, very heavy rainfall that's moved from Nebraska to Iowa, northern Illinois. We're watching heavy rainfall move this morning through here. Of course, our record-setting flooding happening in this part of Texas. But then you start to kind of hone in on the drier areas, like down here in parts of Alabama, Georgia, or pockets of the Northeast. And then you can see that even though we're starting to get deeper convection to spin up here in the Four Corners states, we've not been overly wet there yet. While parts of the Front Range getting out into parts of eastern Colorado have not just seen locally very heavy rainfall, because they have, but many storms have produced some pretty sizable hail. I want to look at it another way. Take you back to the beginning of the month on our soil moisture. This is the 0 to 40 centimeter or 0 to 16 inches, and it's a percentile. So again, think of it as a rank. This is where we started the month, and this is where we are now. And you'll notice in the Northwest how much drier it's gotten, especially in the Willamette Valley. You'll see that even though moisture has come through parts of Nebraska, there are still some subsurface soil moisture deficits here. There's also some that can remain in this area. There's where the drought has been developing down in parts of southern Georgia, the Panhandle, despite the tropical system that went through there last week. And so we just start to pick these things out and at the same time see where our soils are very, very saturated due to recent heavy rainfall. Now, a lot of the discussion is going to be turning to temperatures, and I was asked numerous times, because I don't understand this is not my area of expertise, about something called tassel wrap on corn. Now, I just asked some friends and colleagues about it just to kind of get a better understanding, but in short, it seems as though the speed at which the crop has grown may keep the tassel from opening up early. And I want to point out just what I know meteorologically about this. And what you've got here is that since the middle of June, all right, up until yesterday, so much of the mid-Mississippi, upper Mississippi basin here, through the eastern Corn Belt to the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, this area's had some incredibly hot overnight low temperatures. Now, it's been more of a steady above average, not just like a couple of nights that were in the 80s, for example. It was more just like every night routinely hot. And when you do that, you are increasing your GDD number. You also have the hot daytime temperatures as going along with that as well. But you're also, this puts a lot of stress on the crop and its ability to, for lack of a better description, kind of take the night off, if you will. And so instead, the respiration process continues, and it can be quite stressful on the crop. So we've been talking about this for a few weeks, but I want to just give you the updated statistics on this. Now, I was just curious because we've seen some of these issues at our innovation farm down here in Tolono, Illinois. It's south of Champaign. And so we planted 113-day corn on, I'll just pick May 1st. We started planting. And I want to just zoom in on this particular part of the plot, because this line in through here represents the historical average GDD accumulation rate. All right, so that would be where we were. So this is how cool the end of May, remember that? And the beginning of June was. We were way off pace. So the heat that's come in has brought us not only back on pace, but we're now above. So in other words, what was missing here, we've made up for that much, much more. But it would have been great to have the early heat on the crop and less heat on it now. That would be I guess what you'd call the most ideal situation. Compared to 2024, though, take a look at the difference here. That line that just showed up there is 2024. We had that early season heat, and we just maintained it. So we were, right now, last year. So, we'd say about it's maybe 5-6 days. That's the crop difference in terms of maturity with respect to, just accumulation of heat. And if you look this through, just take a look. This is kind of a daily high and low bar. So there's the highs and there's the lows. This is what we're talking about. That's kind of just a line along the bottom edge of the daily temperatures. And so if average is here, this is all of this overnight low, heat that's been accumulated during this time frame. And for us, where I am, we've had just-in-time rains. So what's very important when you look at this is that the moisture needs to be a stair step, and it needs to kind of match the slope of history. So even though we're down on total moisture, as you can see, it's more of the shape of the line. There's no big long plateaus, which can make things very, very stressful on the crop. So if it does plateau, we've got issues overall. So I wanted to show you that with a new tool I'll be releasing as well. It's a growing degree day tool. Now, there's no doubt it's going to get hot. We have intermixed here, an area of flood surrounded by an area of excessive heat watches and warnings. And then on the outside of that, we've got this, large region of heat advisory that stretches from the southeast all the way back to North and South Dakota, well, really mainly South Dakota. To the north of that, still some air quality issues, some dense fog early this morning in this part of North Dakota, and some red flag warnings back into the western United States here. And coastal flooding issues going on in and around San Francisco, just as another point of reference. Now, thinking this through, have we changed any of the big components of the atmosphere we've talked about so much? Well, there's a piece of the Bermuda High system that is here, and this is going to be important overall to the heat that's coming through. But our Bermuda High is still quite extensive, and I am kind of on heightened alert to watch to see if this piece of the Bermuda High, which keeps flexing its way into the Caribbean and into the Gulf, if it's ever just going to die off, retreat, move north, or move to Africa or something like that, because that would signal a massive pattern change, as would the repositioning of our Pacific High. This is kind of the Northeast Pacific High. It's been somewhere in that vicinity for quite some time. And we don't want to know if these pieces are going to change, especially, I'll be honest with you, with the wind speed across the Caribbean. That's going to be critical for understanding any sort of tropical development, which, by the way, we're keeping an eye on this guy right down here. I'll tell you more about that in just a second or so. But let's get back to these temperatures. This is this morning's minimum temperatures. And if we just go to tomorrow, we see these well into the 70s in the Corn Belt. That's very problematic. Watch the change that's going to happen in the Northeast, though. This is tomorrow morning. That's getting into Wednesday. So, mid to upper 70s is very stressful on a crop in the third week of July. But as we go forward, watch the heat just move into the Northeast. So this is going to be a 25-degree swing in overnight low temperatures alone. And meanwhile, California, cool. The Northwest, near normal. And as we just see these temperatures evolve, there's a lot of heat packed in here. And it's the duration of those hot overnight lows, which I would just tell you somewhere between 72 and 74 is a stressor on corn that's growing kind of, let's just call it the I-state region right in through here. So we're kind of borderline against these very stressful temperatures. The daytime highs, look how cool the west is today, while the central plains are going to be hitting triple digit. Again, watch the northeast, Here's today, getting into tomorrow. Watch the heat just build into this area, deep into the 90s, tremendous amounts of moisture in the air into this area, which is what's given us such high heat index values. That's Wednesday. That's going to be a very hot day throughout the Mississippi Valley. Cooler in the northern plains, cooler in the west. The heat builds in late this week into the northeast. The humidity does with it as well. And as we get toward Friday and Saturday and Sunday, there's just a lot of heat as this sizable ridge opens up. So here's the idea. As this ridge opens up, we're going to have something cascading over the top of it and something curling in underneath the bottom of it. And the West Coast just doesn't have the setup to just go and stay hot. Now, the hottest area, if we look at where we're going to be rapidly accumulating stress degree days, of course, is going to be focused on the Central Plains where, again, where my good friend Dallas lives down here. He's going to be looking at 100 plus stress degree days this week, which means we're just simply adding up the temperature above 86 every day. So very high accumulation rate here, but this just kind of illustrates where the majority of that heat's going to be. The problem too is going to be it's going to have some wind, and we're also going to see evaporation rates under this air mass be quite high. And the issue here is actually there's going to be moisture in the atmosphere, but it's the difference between the temperature and dew point that continue to drive these higher evaporation rates, which I'm going to illustrate in just a few moments here. So there you go. That's our 7-day total evaporation rate map compared to that stress degree day map. Now, the reflection of all of this in the atmosphere is happening with this block right there. That's what's setting this up. We're just taking the momentum out of the flow. That block kind of lives in some sort of fashion here. There's the high to the low, dips a trough into the west, and this ridge just begins to move. And Matt talked about it a lot on Friday. It starts off south, mid-south, and then this is by Wednesday into Thursday. It starts to open itself up into the southern plains. There it is by the weekend. And most of the models, all right, tend to pull the ridge back into the, the Bering Sea, leaving a trough there. Flow comes around and over. And you're going to have to watch this corridor very carefully for a lot of thunderstorm activity. Underneath it, we're going to have heat, but it's going to be too dry, believe it or not, to get the storms to explode in this area because the humidity levels, while the specific humidity is high, the relative humidity is too low. So that means the absolute amount of moisture is high, but relative to the temperature, it's too low. And all the way out there to August 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, that ridge just kind of settles in and migrates over toward the Four Corners states. So you're going to get a lot of storms in this ridge here in the mountains. We're going to get storms that run over the periphery here, but I'm worried about this area for going over very, very hot and very dry. So speaking of the temperatures, here's your next 5 days. And as we played out there, day 5 through 10, look at that West Coast cool down. While all of this heat, 5, 6, 7 degrees above average, moves in to finish the month of July into this area toward the northeast. Then as we start August, that's how the pattern's taking shape in August. And while there seems to be, as the ridge moves here, the heat following it, getting this cooler conditions over parts of the Great Lakes. I shouldn't say cooler, near normal conditions over the Great Lakes to the northeast. Some pockets of the country, especially in the central U.S., are going to stay tucked away in this heat, I think, for some time. All right. Now, there's an interesting thing. So let's flip our minds over to precip. There's an interesting thing I found over the weekend at water.noaa.gov. Go check this out. Go to operations, and then you can come down here and see all of these different options for understanding, different weather factors. So I went over to not the hydrologic discussion, but I went over here to which one did I go to? The area hydrologic discussion. Forgive me, that's the one I went to. So they're apparently none active. A moment ago, there was right into this area, but we've kind of seen some of that rainfall when overnight they had released this hydrologic discussion about the flash flooding into this area. So they just updated it right when I clicked, of course, to see it. That's how it goes, I guess. In addition to that, a lot of scattered convection in the southwest overnight. You can see this as this front sags. Look to the north. Wind damage along this, this bow echo feature. Watch it come out of, here it is, out of Montana into the Dakotas right there. See that? And we're waiting to see just how much damage happened overnight. That's been going on while I've been preparing this briefing this morning. And I am expecting to see more, look at that bow echo squall line type storm structure in the coming days. So we are going to keep an eye today here in Montana, tomorrow, the Dakotas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then in the day on Wednesday, northern Wisconsin, the UP. And along that, expect, the severe wind threat to be at the primary thing, although I expect hail back here today. From there, though, I just want to kind of give you a sense of this by using the high-resolution rapid refresh model. So there's the storms well initialized, I think, this morning. So watch what happens by this afternoon. See this? These are hailers over here. Scattered convection into the southeast. Some storms in the central plains. Getting into tonight and into tomorrow morning, we're going to watch the same thing. Just watch the storms move around the broader ridge that's setting up here. We're just going to have to now cast our way through this to understand who's going to have the greatest severe threat. But it does, overall resemble a pattern that should look something like this. Okay. Now, with the troughs in the west, I want to keep an eye on this area for stronger storms at times. And then what's going to happen is we're going to run over the ridge, which is going to be planted somewhere in here, maybe focus there initially and then moving. Okay. So what you end up getting is flow over the top deep in the atmosphere that meets flow near the surface here. The wind shear is not high. So what ends up happening is the storms generate their own environmental shear within their smaller environments, and they just cascade as lines that go through here. Now, will this get into the northeast? Well, that'll be a question mark as to how far to the west the ridge goes. The northeast could go over drier. I know we've got some waves of heat coming through, but it could be drier. I'm questioning the mid-Atlantic as well. I think we can get these storms all the way to the mid-Atlantic. And underneath this ridge, we're going to sneak more moisture into this area, which parts of Georgia and Alabama definitely need. So that's the new European ensemble. This is the new GFS ensemble. There's some similarities. Okay. And this is the AI outlook for this. And it's much, much different. It's trying to anchor the driest conditions here, not as far back to the west as the other models are doing. So we need to pay attention to what this could mean, going forward. But precipitation-wise, if we just look at the probabilities over the next 10 days, and I just stick with the European ensemble, not the AI, It is driest in this corner of the country overall for the next 15 days if you're east of the Rocky Mountains. A lot of isolated storms here. Watch for the isolated storms here. But in the west, it's going to be pretty dry. Now, on the wet side of this, I should get a new model run, yeah. Let's go back and cue that up. There you go. Look around the periphery of that. Look at that corridor of storms. And I do think we can get more of these over to the mid-Atlantic as well. On the southern side of that ridge, look at this. Just bringing in that moisture along, the Gulf Coast there. So that makes a lot of sense to me when I think about these rain corridors versus the dry corridors over the next 10 to 15 days. Okay, I mentioned something about the specific humidity versus the relative humidity. And so I'm going to go over to Pivotal Weather. It's a great website. And it's what I like about it is you can drop a pin and get you can get a sounding. So this is like a forecast weather balloon launch, if you will. So this is what I mean. The dew point where I just dropped this, this is 6 days from now, down there in this part of Oklahoma. Look, the dew point's 61. There's moisture in the air. But when the high temperature's up here in the upper 90s, the difference, the space between these two lines is the relative humidity. The absolute is represented here with the value. That's plenty of moisture. But it's so hot that where the thunderstorm base would be in the atmosphere is somewhere up here around, 2 kilometers. I mean, it's so high. The LCL values, are way, way up there in the sky. So having that base of those thunderstorms so high, any precipitation they do make will evaporate. We get virga out of this. And there is very, very little wind shear. This is called a hodograph. Kind of tells us how the wind speed changes both with direction and magnitude with height. And boy, this is just a stagnant environment. It's under the ridge. Look, from the surface, the winds are out of the south-southwest. Aloft, they're out of the north-northwest. That's the spin around the big ridge in the atmosphere. So this is why we're so concerned, about this area being so dry with respect to the relative humidity compared to the specific humidity. So again, I've been working on just ways to visualize this, and the new European model, this is just the single run, as we play it out here through Friday into Saturday and Sunday. That just seems to get missed where these storms run around the edge. They've got a lot of moisture in them. So the model's trying to kick out a few spots in here of 3, 4, 5 inches of rain. And we just had rain that came through, so that's included in this. And you can see coming through here, look at these rainfall values, 1 inch to 2 inches, some places over 3. And just going on out there, big question will be, European model, we are now 10 days in the forecast. Now watch right here. The new European is attempting to blast something through Kansas and Oklahoma, shrinking that hole, but it's more than 10 days out, so we cannot trust this by any stretch. Now, earlier we mentioned a bit about the tropics. You saw that little wave that was moving through there. The National Hurricane Center has given this a 20% chance of development. Just to make a point, over the next 10 days, the models are not that aggressive on developing anything in the open Atlantic. We're keeping an eye out here, but this would go out to open ocean around the large Bermuda High, which is in this area. And just understand that the pressure is going to be low enough with the way this flow is coming through that it might resemble, being low enough to be tropical depression-like, but we're not expecting formation, at least as of this morning as I look through this. There's also quite a bit of dust that's being blown off of the Sahara that's moving across the Atlantic, and this is continuing to reshape the way we're thinking about the 2025 hurricane season. We tend to get a lot of dust like this in June. It's carried over into much of July this year, and that dry, dusty air is quite a lot for any tropical system to contend with. Even though the ocean temperatures are warm, so if you compare to historical averages, the Atlantic Ocean temperatures are quite warm right now. The problem is that we've had issues with vertical instability. In other words, the atmosphere is not destabilized enough. It's been too lidded, if you will, to blow off storms. So you can see the values here in June and July have been below the historical mean. And on top of that, we can see that the mean sea level pressure has been high. So the atmosphere has let that Bermuda High be expansive rather than allow storms to run along its periphery. So there's average pressure in the tropical Atlantic. Here's where we've been this year. And the last piece to this, I keep mentioning this lid on the atmosphere, the vertical instability. Again, if you just see how much lower than average it's been, you've got to take that off by some movement in the tropical, what we call velocity potentials. In other words, where the atmosphere is able to breathe and exhaust upward versus where it's being, well, in a lack of a better term, kind of capped. So let me show you what I'm worried about here. Okay, this is a neat, this is called a Havmuller. This one goes out 46 days. So here's today all the way through September 1. Now, that is, September is the peak hurricane month. Now, wherever you see these colors, let me kind of highlight them for you. That is where there is suppression in the atmosphere. And the model's attempting to take that suppression and move it in this direction, basically across the Pacific Ocean, and land it somewhere over in the tropical Atlantic. Now, if that occurs, that's going to put a lid mid to late August all the way through September on some tropical development. Now, right now, remember how we said the end of the month of July could have some sort of development? No, yeah, we've got better rising motion here, but it's dusty and the pressure's too high. So that's why we're not seeing just explosive tropical convection, but it's a good environment now should something get going. What I want to know is this. It appears that the MJO wants to live in the Indian Ocean, phase 1, 2, 3, 4, as we get out there to August. Now, if I'm going to try to make a stab at figuring out what August is going to be, this is one piece to the puzzle. The Bermuda High, the position of the jet, those are other pieces to the puzzle. But take a look at this. If we see the MJO to begin the month of August in phase 1, 2, or 3, so again, that's where we have rising motion in the Indian Ocean, okay? If we see that, we tend to produce a ridge over the Great Lakes and a trough in the west. See? What if we go to phase 2? The ridge is even more pronounced. There's much stronger flow into the northwest and Canadian Prairie. This is a huge stormy signal for the Canadian Prairie, but it's a dry and hot signal if you're, here in the Midwest. What about if we go to phase 3? Same thing. Phase 4. Now watch this. Going from phase 4 to phase 5. See that? That's simply putting the MJ over the Indian Ocean, over Indonesia, out of the Indian Ocean. We flip the pattern. And 6 and 7 drop troughs here while a big blocking pattern sets up just off the west coast. So it matters where this is going to be. So let me tell you what the difference is. If you put this here, it's giving us a signal for ridging over the Mississippi Valley. If you were to flip this and put these colors here, I'd say the ridging is over the west coast. So the playing out of this is going to be a very decisive part, I think, of the longer range forecast. And I think the CPC picked up on it because their Friday release of their week 3, week 4 outlook, which is the first 2 weeks of August, is now suggesting some sort of broader ridging event that's here. So take a look. Active southwest monsoon. Where the storm's going to be? Canadian Prairie running the periphery. Where's the heat going to be? It's going to be centered in this area. And that's an interesting look. Now, the models don't agree. They just don't. Take a look. Here is the GFS extended forecast. Goes out 35 days. This is the next 7 days according to the model. This would be week 2 right there. Look, see, we're watching this right now, and all the storms running the periphery. What we're curious about is week 3, which gets us out to here, and week 4, which gets us out, about there. You're going, wait a minute. The GFS is wet here. It's got the ridge maybe somewhere closer to this area, which is what's driving all this monsoonal circulation down here. So you say, just give me the next 30 days. Well, if we take that out, that's what it's doing. It is just leaving the ridge in place and just bringing storms all around its periphery. So that is not the same argument that I built here. What about the European? Well, here's the next 7 days. This is getting out to week 2. Same story. See the storms running the periphery, the dryness in there. Here's week 3. Week 4. It also is drier in here. So we look at a 30-day anomaly. You see, let's just take it out there a little bit. Look. It's leaving it in the same spot. More storms running the periphery. More of a southwest monsoon trying to get going. It's not trying to anchor this dryness here. So Climate Prediction Center, we're going to watch you. And I'm going to watch you. And I understand where your forecast came from. And I believe it's heavily being attributed to the movement of the MJO. What's interesting is it's the European model that's giving us this look, yet it's not necessarily consistent with its own forecast on precipitation. So that's what we do. We try to pick out these nuances and figure out, well, what's what. So I'll be watching this very, very carefully as we go forward. Now, for me, the biggest story is simply going to be this. Since the beginning of July, we've had an expansive Pacific high, an expansive Bermuda high, and a piece of it's always come through here. Where will these be by the start of August? That's what I want to know. And the other piece of this is we have had very strong trade winds at times. Look at what's going on even over here in the Indian Ocean. These stronger trade winds are very, very reminiscent of La Nina-like behavior. We can even see the negative PMM, the stronger trades giving us some upwelling here. I mean, there's still a La Nina signal in this, and you know that some of the models are going after La Nina for late. So I was pulling up the newest IRI multi-model probability forecast. I'm just going to preface this by telling you this model did not do well with its summer prediction. You want me to prove it to you? Let's go back. Let's say, well, what did you predict in May for June, July, and August? Okay. So notice how dry it was expecting it to be June, July, August in the Central Plains and Northern Plains. It may have gotten this right, but it didn't get that right. And it's so we got to be very careful with these models. But this is the new July update for August, September, October. It's trying to go drier here. Drier, Black Sea, more Russian wheat belt, but that is your La Nina signal. Wet Indonesia, wet Australia as they go through spring in Australia. That's just telling me that stronger trades, best rising motion, MJO phase 4. That's a lot of MJO phase 4 in the forecast. So that's August, September, October. Let's just look at the model. September, October, November. Possibly drier Mississippi Valley according to the model. This would be, can't ignore this. That's a wetter signal in Brazil, indicating maybe an early start to the monsoon season with dryness. Boy, that is La Nina too. Wetter here, drier there. So we need to consider what this La Nina-like fall and winter forecast could do. What it's going to do to the hurricane center should be beneficial. Let me rephrase that. Should be more prone to make more hurricanes. I don't know the way to say it properly. And then you notice November, December, January, it's got the whole southern tier of the U.S. drier. That's La Nina-like too. I think these models are biting into it pretty hard. So we've got all these things to talk about this week. Matt will pick it up tomorrow morning, and we'll keep going with the narrative and try to keep you posted with what we see. But that's what I've got for you today. So take care. We'll talk tomorrow. Thanks.